Most of us don't think much about small amounts of money. A few dollars here, a few dollars there, a coffee on the way to work, a quick lunch because we don't feel like cooking, a small purchase because, after all, it's only a few dollars. We rarely stop to ask where those small amounts are taking us. They don't feel important. They don't feel dangerous. And sometimes, we don't even remember spending them. Ethan was exactly the same. He worked hard, he paid his bills. He wasn't a careless person. He simply believed that small choices couldn't make a big difference. For a long time, that belief seemed harmless. Until one ordinary morning, Ethan began looking at his money in a completely different way. Not because he suddenly became rich. Not because he discovered a secret investment. It started with something much smaller. A habit that took less than a minute. The life that looked fine. Ethan was 34 years old and worked for a small marketing company. He had a steady income. He rented a comfortable apartment. He owned an old but reliable car. He paid his bills on time. If someone asked him about his financial situation, he would probably say, "I'm doing okay." And that was mostly true. Ethan wasn't deeply in debt. He wasn't buying expensive things every week. He wasn't trying to look rich. His problem was much quieter. He simply didn't pay enough attention to the small decisions he made every day. Every morning, Ethan stopped at the same coffee shop on his way to work. He usually ordered a large coffee. Sometimes he added breakfast. The cashier knew his order. "Good morning, Ethan. The usual?" "Yes, please." He would tap his card, take his coffee, and walk to work. It didn't feel like spending money. It felt like part of his morning routine. At lunchtime, his coworkers often ordered food together. Ethan could bring lunch from home, but he usually didn't. "Come on," his coworker Jake would say. "It's Friday." Ethan would smile. "All right, a few dollars here, $10 there." Nothing seemed serious. After work, Ethan sometimes stopped at a convenience store. He might buy a drink, maybe a snack. Sometimes he saw something on sale and thought, "I might need this." He bought it. Then there were the subscriptions. One for music, one for movies, one for an app he barely used. He also had a gym membership. He had promised himself he would start going regularly. That promise had lasted about 3 weeks. After that, the monthly payment continued. Ethan rarely thought about it. At the end of each month, he paid his bills and looked at his bank account. The number was usually lower than he expected. He would stare at it for a few seconds. Then he would say, "I don't understand where my money went." But he never investigated. He simply waited for the next paycheck. And when the next paycheck arrived, the cycle began again. Earn, spend, pay bills, wait, repeat. Ethan didn't realize that he had created a financial habit without ever consciously choosing one. His habit wasn't saving. It was spending whatever felt available. And because every individual purchase seemed small, he never felt the need to change. Until one Friday morning, something happened that made him stop and look at his money differently. He had no idea that the solution would also be small. Very small. Just $5. The day he started paying attention. That Friday morning, Ethan arrived at work a little earlier than usual. He placed his coffee on the desk, opened his laptop, and started checking his emails. A few minutes later, Jake walked over. "Lunch today?" Ethan looked up. "Sure. Where are we going?" Jake mentioned a new restaurant near the office. Ethan smiled. "Sounds good." Then he opened his banking app. He wasn't looking for anything special. He simply wanted to check whether his paycheck had arrived. It hadn't. His eyes moved down to his current balance. He stopped. There was less money than he expected. Ethan looked again. He opened the transaction history. Coffee, breakfast, restaurant, gas, online purchase, subscription, delivery, another coffee. He slowly scrolled through the list. None of the purchases looked terrible. That was the strange part. There was no huge mistake, no expensive vacation, no luxury purchase, just one small decision after another. Ethan leaned back in his chair. For the first time, he added some of them together. His coffee purchases alone were more than he had imagined. The meals he ordered at work were another large amount. Then he looked at the subscriptions he barely used. He started doing the math. The numbers surprised him. Not because he had spent a fortune in one day, but because small amounts had quietly become a large amount over time. Ethan closed the app. He felt embarrassed. Not because anyone else knew. Nobody did. He was embarrassed because he knew he had been telling himself the same story for years. It's only a few dollars. But there was a problem with that sentence. A few dollars repeated every day was no longer a few dollars. It was a habit. At lunch, Jake asked, "You coming?" Ethan looked at him. "I think I'll stay here today." Jake laughed. "What happened? You're suddenly saving money?" "Maybe. You're serious?" Ethan smiled. "I think I need to be." He opened the lunch he had brought from home. It wasn't exciting, just a sandwich and some fruit. But for the first time, Ethan wasn't thinking about what he was giving up. He was thinking about what he was learning. That evening, he sat at his kitchen table with a notebook. He wrote down his monthly income, then his rent, then his bills, then his transportation costs, then food, then everything else. It took almost an hour. When he finished, he looked at the page. His income wasn't the problem. His spending wasn't completely out of control either, but there was almost no space between the money coming in and the money going out. If something unexpected happened, he would have a problem. A broken car, a medical bill, a few weeks without work. Anything could push him into debt. Ethan looked at the notebook. He realized he didn't need a complicated financial plan. He needed a little breathing room. But how could he create it? He didn't think he could suddenly save hundreds of dollars every month. That would be too difficult. If the goal was too big, he knew he might give up. So he decided to start with something almost ridiculously small. $5. He opened his banking app and created a separate savings account. Then he transferred $5 into it. 5. Ethan looked at the screen. He almost laughed. This isn't going to change my life. But he left the money there. He didn't know it yet, but that tiny decision was about to change much more than his bank balance. It was going to change the way he thought. The $5 rule. The next morning, Ethan almost forgot about the $5. He woke up, made coffee, and started getting ready for work. Then he saw the notification on his phone. Transfer completed. $5. He smiled. It still seemed almost meaningless. $5 wasn't going to pay his rent. It wasn't going to buy a car. It wasn't going to make him financially independent. But Ethan decided to try something. Every time he received his paycheck, he would save the first $5. Not the money left over at the end of the week. Not whatever happened to remain after spending. The first $5 would go directly into savings. He called it his $5 rule. The rule was simple. Pay yourself first, even if the amount is small. On his next payday, Ethan transferred another $5. The following payday, another $5. At first, nothing seemed different. His savings account had $10, then $15, then $20. Ethan wasn't impressed, but something else was happening. He had started paying attention. One afternoon, he was standing in the coffee shop near his office. The cashier smiled. The usual? Ethan looked at the menu. For a moment, he was ready to order his large coffee. Then he remembered the money he had been trying to save. He asked himself a simple question. Do I really need this? The answer was no. He didn't hate coffee. He still enjoyed it. But he realized he didn't need to buy it every morning. That day, he made coffee at the office. It wasn't as good, but it was free. The next day, he bought coffee. He didn't try to become extremely strict with himself. That was important. Ethan wasn't trying to punish himself. He was learning to choose. Sometimes he bought the coffee. Sometimes he didn't. Sometimes he went to lunch with his coworkers. Sometimes he brought food from home. The difference was that he started making decisions consciously. Before, money disappeared quietly. Now Ethan noticed where it was going. A month passed. His savings reached $40. He looked at the balance and smiled. $40 wasn't much, but he felt different. For the first time, he had money that wasn't already assigned to a bill. It was simply there, waiting. Ethan began calling it his breathing room. He liked those words. He had spent years living with almost no space between his income and his expenses. Now he had a tiny space. It was small, but it belonged to him. One evening, Ethan was talking with his friend Marcus. Marcus was older and had always been careful with money. Ethan told him about the $5 rule. Marcus smiled. Do you think $5 is going to make you rich? Ethan laughed. No. Then why are you doing it? Ethan thought for a moment. I don't know. Marcus looked at him. Maybe that's the wrong question. What do you mean? The goal isn't the $5. Ethan waited. Marcus continued. The goal is becoming the kind of person who saves. Ethan became quiet. He had never thought about money that way. He had been looking at the number. Marcus was looking at the habit. That night, Ethan wrote the sentence in his notebook. The goal isn't the money. The goal is the person I become. He read it again. Then he understood why the $5 rule was beginning to feel different. It wasn't really about $5. It was about proving to himself that he could make a choice today that would help him tomorrow. And that was something Ethan had never done consistently before, when the habit became a choice. For the next few months, Ethan continued with his $5 rule. Every payday, the first $5 went into his savings account. He never touched it. At the beginning, it was easy to ignore. $5 didn't feel like real savings. But after a while, something unexpected happened. Ethan started noticing other choices. One Saturday afternoon, he was walking through a shopping center when he saw a pair of shoes he liked. They weren't extremely expensive. They were on sale. The old Ethan would have bought them immediately. After all, they were discounted. But this time, he stopped. He looked at the shoes. Then he asked himself, do I need them, or do I just want them? He stood there for a few seconds. He realized he already had 3 pairs of shoes at home. So he walked away. It wasn't a big decision. Nobody congratulated him. Nothing exciting happened. But Ethan felt strangely proud. He had made a choice instead of simply following an impulse. A few days later, he canceled 2 subscriptions he never used. The following week, he started bringing lunch from home 3 days a week. He also began checking his bank account every Sunday evening. Not because he was afraid of spending money. He simply wanted to know where his money was going. Slowly, his financial life became clearer. He knew how much he earned. He knew how much he needed for essential expenses. He knew where he was wasting money. And, perhaps most importantly, he stopped feeling helpless. Before, Ethan would look at his bank balance at the end of the month and think, where did it all go? Now he could answer that question. He had begun to understand the difference between spending money and choosing to spend money. They looked similar from the outside, but they felt completely different. One Friday evening, Ethan met Jake for dinner. Jake looked at him and said, "You've changed your habits." Ethan smiled. "Have I?" "You don't order delivery anymore." "Not as often." "And you actually bring lunch to work." "Sometimes." Jake laughed. "Are you becoming a financial expert?" "Definitely not." Ethan laughed too. "I just started paying attention." That sentence stayed with him. I just started paying attention. He realized that was the real change. The $5 habit had forced him to notice his decisions. And once he started noticing, he began making better choices. Still, Ethan knew he wasn't finished. He had saved a little money. He had reduced some unnecessary spending, but his savings were still small. If something serious happened, he could still be in trouble. And then, one ordinary afternoon, something happened that would test whether his new habit was really working. Ethan was driving home from work when he noticed something unusual. His car made a strange sound. He turned down the radio. The sound became louder. Ethan pulled over. He called a mechanic. After a short inspection, the mechanic gave him the news. The car needed an important repair. Ethan asked, "How much?" The mechanic told him. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. It was more money than he had expected. For a moment, the old fear returned. He thought about his credit card. He thought about borrowing money. Then he remembered the savings account he had almost forgotten about. It wasn't a fortune, but it was there. For the first time in his life, an unexpected expense didn't immediately feel like a disaster. Ethan opened his banking app. He looked at his savings, and he smiled. The $5 habit had finally become something real. It had given him something he had never had before. A little breathing room. The month, he almost gave up. The car repair cost more than Ethan had saved. He used most of his savings to pay for it. When he looked at the account afterward, only a small amount remained. For a moment, he felt disappointed. He had spent months putting money away. Now most of it was gone. Ethan sat in his car outside the mechanic's shop and stared at the balance on his phone. He thought, what's the point? $5 at a time had taken him months, and one unexpected problem had almost erased everything. He felt the temptation to stop. Maybe saving wasn't worth it. Maybe he should just enjoy his money while he had it. After all, life was expensive. There was always something. A car repair, a medical bill, a higher electricity bill, a broken phone. An unexpected expense seemed to appear whenever he started getting ahead. That evening, Ethan called Marcus. "I had to use most of my savings." "I know." "How?" "You told me." "Oh." Ethan was quiet. Then he said, "I feel like I failed." Marcus laughed softly. "Why?" "Because I saved all that money and now it's almost gone." Marcus paused. "Ethan, what would have happened if you hadn't saved it?" Ethan thought about it. He would have used his credit card. Or borrowed money. Maybe both. Marcus continued. "So did your savings disappear?" "Yes." "Or did they do exactly what they were supposed to do?" Ethan didn't answer. Marcus said, "Your savings protected you." That sentence changed the way Ethan saw the situation. The money hadn't been wasted. It had done its job. It had given him a choice. Without those savings, the car repair would have created a much bigger problem. Ethan looked at his account again. There wasn't much left. But now he understood. The goal wasn't to build savings so he could stare at a large number on a screen. The goal was to create some protection for the moments he couldn't predict. The next payday, Ethan transferred another $5. Then another. He continued. Not because he expected quick results, because he had learned that financial security wasn't built in one dramatic decision. It was built through repeated choices. A few weeks later, Ethan had another difficult month. His company lost an important client. Several employees had their hours reduced. Ethan's working hours were cut too. His income was smaller than usual. This time he felt nervous. But he didn't panic. He looked at his budget. He canceled a few unnecessary expenses. He cooked more meals at home. He used some of his savings for essential costs. And he kept going. For the first time, Ethan realized that the habit had changed more than his bank account. It had changed his behavior when things went wrong. Before, unexpected problems made him feel helpless. Now he had a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it existed. One evening, Ethan opened his notebook. At the top of the page, he wrote, "Small habits don't always produce big results immediately." Then he added, "Sometimes they prepare you for difficult days." He read the sentence twice. He finally understood why Marcus had never cared about the size of the first $5. The important thing was not how much Ethan saved. The important thing was that he had stopped waiting for the perfect financial situation to begin. He had started with what he could afford. And he had kept going. The habit changed more than his money. Several months passed. Ethan's working hours returned to normal, and slowly, his savings began to grow again. $10, $50, $100, then several hundred. It still wasn't enough to make him rich, but Ethan no longer expected it to. Something much more important had changed. He had become more aware of his decisions. Before buying something, he often stopped for a moment. Do I need this? Will I still want this next week? Is there a better use for this money? Sometimes the answer was yes. He bought the thing. Sometimes the answer was no. He walked away. There was no guilt, no extreme rules, no attempt to stop enjoying life. Ethan still went to restaurants. He still bought coffee. He still traveled when he could. The difference was that he was choosing these things instead of buying them automatically. One evening, Ethan was having dinner with Marcus. Marcus asked, "So, how much have you saved now?" Ethan smiled. I'm not really focused on the number anymore. Marcus nodded. Good. I used to think saving money was about having a big balance. And now? Now I think it's about having choices. Marcus smiled. That sounds much better. Ethan thought about that. Having choices. That was exactly what his old financial life had been missing. When he had only a few dollars left before payday, he had no choices. If his car broke down, he panicked. If a bill was higher than expected, he worried. If his hours were reduced, he reached for his credit card. Now, even though he wasn't wealthy, he had some space, a little money, a little planning, a little confidence. And that changed the way he felt. He no longer feared every unexpected expense. He could handle small problems without feeling that his entire life was falling apart. One Saturday morning, Ethan was cleaning his apartment when he found an old box. Inside were receipts, old bills, and bank statements from several years earlier. He sat on the floor and looked through them. He saw the same patterns again and again. Small purchases, small subscriptions, small payments, nothing dramatic. But together, they had created a life where he was always waiting for the next paycheck. Ethan shook his head. He wasn't angry at his younger self. He simply understood him better. That version of Ethan hadn't been irresponsible. He had never learned to pay attention. And that realization was important. Personal change becomes much easier when you stop hating the person you used to be. Ethan closed the box. Then he opened his notebook. On a clean page, he wrote, $5 changed nothing. He paused. Then he continued. But saving $5 changed me. He looked at the sentence for a long time. That was the real story. The money was small, the habit was small. But the identity behind the habit was becoming stronger. He was becoming someone who planned, someone who waited before buying, someone who thought about tomorrow, someone who could handle an unexpected problem without immediately falling into panic. And perhaps that was worth more than the money itself. One afternoon, Ethan received a message from Jake. Want to grab coffee? Ethan smiled. He replied, Sure, my treat. They met at the same coffee shop where Ethan had once gone almost every morning. Jake looked at him. You still come here? Sometimes. Didn't you used to come every day? I did. What changed? Ethan thought for a second. I realized I want to enjoy things I choose, not things I automatically buy. Jake laughed. That sounds complicated. Ethan smiled. It actually makes life simpler. They ordered coffee. Ethan paid $5. He didn't feel guilty, because this time it was a conscious choice. And that was the difference. He wasn't afraid of spending money. He had simply learned to give his money a purpose, the small habit that changed his life. 1 year after Ethan started his $5 rule, he received an email from his company. His position was changing. The company was reorganizing, and several employees were being asked to work fewer hours. Ethan read the email twice. A year earlier, this kind of news would have frightened him. He would have immediately opened his credit card app. He would have worried about rent. He would have imagined everything that could go wrong. This time, he took a breath. Then he opened his savings account. He didn't have enough money to stop working forever. He wasn't financially independent, but he had enough to give himself time. Enough to pay his essential expenses for a while. Enough to look for another opportunity without making a desperate decision. Ethan closed the app. He smiled. He finally understood what the $5 habit had really given him. It hadn't made him rich. It had given him breathing room, and breathing room gave him choices. He could think before he acted. He could handle a problem without immediately panicking. He could say no to things he didn't need. He could say yes to things that truly mattered. That evening, Ethan met Marcus for dinner. "I finally understand," Ethan said. Marcus smiled. "Understand what?" "The $5 were never the point." Marcus waited. "The point was learning to pay attention." Marcus nodded. Ethan continued. "Before, I thought financial success meant earning more money. Now I think it's also about knowing what to do with the money you already have." Marcus smiled. "That's a lesson many people learn too late." Ethan looked down at his coffee. He thought about all the times he had said, "It's only $5. He no longer said it in the same way. $5 could be small, but small things repeated over time could become powerful. A small expense could become a large habit, and a small saving could become a large habit too. The difference was the direction. That night, Ethan went home and opened his old notebook. On the first page was the question he had written more than a year ago. Where does my money go? Underneath it, he wrote a new question. Where do I want my money to take me? He thought about it. The answer wasn't a luxury car. It wasn't a huge house. It wasn't becoming rich just to tell people he was rich. He wanted freedom. He wanted security. He wanted to help his family. He wanted to travel without fear. And he wanted to know that one unexpected problem wouldn't destroy everything he had built. He closed the notebook. The next morning, his paycheck arrived. Ethan transferred $5 into savings. Just $5. The same amount he had started with. He smiled. Because now he knew something he hadn't known a year earlier. Small enough to start can be powerful enough to change you. And that was the real lesson. The $5 didn't change Ethan's life. The person he became by saving it did. English review and shadowing. Let's practice some useful expressions from Ethan's story. It's only a few dollars. We use this when we think something is inexpensive or unimportant. Repeat. It's only a few dollars. I need to cut back. This means you need to spend less money. Repeat. I need to cut back. Do I really need this? This is a useful question when you're deciding whether to buy something. Repeat. Do I really need this? I'm trying to save money. Repeat. I'm trying to save money. And one final sentence. Small habits can create big changes. Pause. Now repeat. Small habits can create big changes. Again. Small habits can create big changes. You don't have to completely change your financial life today. You can start small, $5, one decision, one better habit. And just like learning English, progress comes from doing something consistently. You don't need to be perfect. You simply need to keep going. Because sometimes the smallest habit can become the beginning of a much bigger change. Start small. Pay attention. Keep going.